Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up. I'm going to give a talk about the 1 million decisions that we had to do when we were making Action Henk. And Action Henk is our first debut game as a game studio. So it's going to be just like all kinds of stuff. I'm going to talk about all kinds of game development stuff. So a bit of tech, a bit of marketing, a bit of art, all kinds of things. So maybe it's good. It's the end of the day. So I just tell a couple of stories, show some screenshots of video and stuff. So let's get started. So Rage Quit, that is the company that I work for. I'm one of the founders of Rage Quit. And we've been going for quite a while now. I think we started with the whole idea of Rage Quit like maybe 5 years ago. But we started out doing a bunch of game jams, which is like smaller game projects where you try to make a game in like 48 hours or something like that. And we always had this idea of, hey, let's turn this into an actual studio. Let's try to do something, like really professional. So after a while, we wanted to get together. We got a bit of freelance work to sort of fund our initial couple of months, get a little office. And then after a while, we had enough money to start working on our debut game, which is Action Henk. So this is sort of what today's story will be about. This was our first game that we commercially made and launched. And yeah, we made like a whole bunch of decisions in the process. So first, for the people that don't know Action Henk, I'd like to show a little trailer of the game. And there you go. So yeah, that's Action Henk. So as you can see, it's sort of like a platformer game. It's like a high-speed platformer game. And I guess now it's time to talk about decisions. So the very first decision that we had to decide when we wanted to make a game is, what platform are we going to launch the game on? And we specifically decided, let's go for Steam. When we started Action Henk, that was about, I think, 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 by now. It was like late 2013, and back in that time, Steam was like the platform to go to because the mobile market was getting like more and more crowded. There were more people launching there, so we said, let's go and make a Steam game because nobody's making Steam games, and that'll be fine. So nowadays, it's a bit different. The Steam market also kind of exploded, and we kind of ran into that as we were developing and launching Action Henk, and I think it's only growing and growing. So it's definitely not a case anymore that launching your game on Steam automatically sort of gives you a certain amount of success. But we didn't know that back then, so we just like, hey, let's do this. So then we started, and then of course, where are you going to get the money? So I was talking a bit about we did some freelance work, but obviously as a studio you can do all kinds of things to make money. So for us, freelance work was a good idea because we could focus first on a couple of months of freelance work, and then we had enough money to fund the entire project, because during the development you don't make any money, right? You only hope that after the development, as you launch the game, you make your money back. So that's like one thing you can do. Obviously, you also have stuff like Kickstarter, which I think can be really cool, but it only lends itself to very specific kinds of projects, very experimental, or very maybe these sort of reboots of old classics, that kind of stuff. And I think Kickstarter is very dangerous as well, because you tend to only hear about the success stories. So you tend to sort of overestimate your own chances, because you don't hear about the thousands of Kickstarters that never, made it. You only hear about the couple of like really big successes. So you're like, oh, let's do a Kickstarter, and we're going to make $1 million. So it's going to be great. So we decided to not do that. Then of course, like you might have subsidies as well. In the Netherlands, you have quite a bunch of subsidies that you can get money from the government. As a student, you can also get like sort of student financing, at least again in the Netherlands. So we had like all kinds of ways to try and make sort of, to be able to work on the game. But especially for your first game, you have to be creative, because you don't just have a pile of money lying around, or at least we didn't. So the whole sort of overarching theme of Action Henk, or at least of the development of Action Henk, was to try and be sort of efficient, because we're a small team. We don't have that many resources. So that's also the reason why we decided to work with Unity as our game engine. And I think this is really one of those things that it can be really hard as a programmer, if you're a programmer. At least I'm a programmer myself, and it's really hard to sort of let things out of your hands, because programmers tend to be like, oh no, I can do that better, or no, you know how it goes, right? So for us, it was really like, let's go with Unity. We can build our own game engine if we want to, but then we are working for 2 years on the game engine, and then we got a nice couple models on screen, but we still have no game. So working with Unity for us was crucial to be able to actually finish the game in less than 5 years. So I'll take you through a couple of steps in sort of the design process of Action Henk. And one of the things we ran into early on was what kind of art style we want to do. And in the theme of going and being efficient, we decided to work with what we know. And we are like the team of Action Henk, which is about 6 people. We come from a school in the Netherlands, and that's where they taught 3D art. So we said, let's go with a 3D game. And that's one of those things, like we try to really stick to our strengths, basically, because that saves you a lot of time. You can have these cool ideas, and a couple of places where this happened was like, oh, this is a great idea, let's do this, but it's not our strength. You're gonna be like struggling, and you have to learn a lot of stuff, and you're gonna have to fight around all these constraints and obstacles. And that was really one of the big things that we ran into. Stuff like cutscenes, for example. We wanted to have this sort of storyline in Action Henk, and we were working on these cutscenes in between levels, and it was just like bad. Like doing this kind of story stuff was not our expertise, and it takes really a lot of time. So we ran into these problems. Like whenever we wanted to do something that was not our strength, we ran into a wall, because it was just we are too small to just be experimenting with this stuff and like, oh, I'm just going to sit down for half a year and figure out how to do proper cutscenes. So art style, stick to your strengths. Another thing really important with Action Henk is the physics. That's another thing where we stuck to our strengths. Like my personal expertise, or what I love doing, is building physics for games. And because Action Henk is a platformer, sort of like physics-based game where the motion of the character is sort of what the game is all about, that was the thing that we really invested heavily in. So in the end, this is also where we decided to step a bit away from Unity's physics system, because it sort of didn't work with the demands that we needed. Physics tends to work really well at high speeds or at low speeds, but not really at high and low speeds. And that was a problem, because in Action Henk, you need to be able to do both. So for that, I sort of built my own raycast setup, where I use the raycast system from Unity, and then build my own dynamics layer on top of it. So for level design, this is another thing where we try to be efficient. Well, I guess everything we try to be efficient. And this is really where I think having a sort of technical approach to a lot of design topics can really help you. And in this case, it was this prediction tool that I built. So as I'm building a level, I get a prediction that tells me how the player is going to go. So I build this prediction node here, and then it says, well, if you're going this fast and you jump there, that's the trajectory you're going to take. So it shows you the trajectory of the player while I'm designing the level, which saves me from going into the level a million times, having to test the jump. There's one problem, though. Because Action Henk is a physics-based game, a good player and a bad player can have a huge variation in the speed they have, because if you do a jump correctly, you can take your speed onto the next jump, and you can really like build the momentum. So there's a very broad possibility of player speeds, basically. So what we said was, well, isn't there a way to use this prediction tool to set up a jump and then run the prediction with different player inputs, so to speak? So what we did is basically that. And what happened here is we have this prediction path with like a run-up and a slide and a jump. And then we add randomness to the inputs of the players. Some players forget to jump, or they don't know they have to jump. Some players don't know they have to slide. Some players are earlier or later. So you add randomness, and then you say, OK, simulate this jump 250 times. And then you get this big collection of lines, which basically says, this is where the players are going to go. And what we can then do is we can detect these certain gaps. And you can see there's gaps in the trajectories, which is spots where players will almost never land. And what we do then is we insert level geometry in between those gaps to create like different levels of paths you can take. And the great thing is, because these paths are almost impossible to reach, players will not like bump into the track and lose all the flow. So the idea of this is that the player, no matter how good the player is, they will always feel like they're doing great, because they come up to a jump. No matter if they do the best move or the worst move, the three landing pads are already placed in such a way that you will basically always land nicely into the curve. And you can see it in the first levels in Action Henk. They're all built like this. It's all, I mean, when you play these levels, you might think, oh yeah, this is fun, or this is a nice setup. But especially the first levels, every jump is built in such a way that you're playing and you're just automatically doing the right thing. And you're just like, oh wow, I'm super good at this. Oh, this game is amazing. That's the idea, at least. And that really helped. That's the programmer approach to level design. And so it's very efficient, and I think it also gets you great levels. So a little bit about the backend. We didn't really do any fancy stuff with the backend in Action Henk. We just basically says, let's use the technology provided by the platform. Like when you work with Steam, they have a big API for leaderboards, for cloud storage, that kind of stuff. We're like, again, let's not build all this stuff ourselves. That's going to take a year, and it's not going to be proper anyway, because we're not like hardcore programmers. Unfortunately, that means we couldn't do a DRM-free version. So you need to have Steam to play the game, because it uses Steam's backend. So that's the only downside to it. But for us, it was definitely worth the being able to just get stuff working. External tech is also really important. With Unity comes the Unity Asset Store, which is a great place where you can buy all kinds of effects and models and packages and scripts and anything. And again, this comes back to the whole programmer thing of being able to let go of certain features, and stuff like networking, multiplayer library. We used Photon networking for that. We used Marmoset for the rendering. That was before Unity had this fancy, like physically based renderer. So that was in like Unity 4, the previous version. So we used this like shader package for the rendering, Rewired for having cross-platform control support, Amplify Color for color correction. That was SSAO Pro, that's for ambient occlusion. Game analytics for, well, game analytics. So that's, to keep track of player stats and like how far players get, and what percentage of people complete certain levels. But this is really like, this is all stuff. Also, we don't have any shader coders. So for us, this is like a no-brainer. We can try to build our own ambient occlusion shader or like post effects, that kind of stuff. That's just a bad idea. So if you can buy a package like that for 10 or 20 bucks, it can save you a week or a month of work. So again, this is really what can save you years of development time if you just allow to let go a bit and say, OK, I'm going to use somebody else's technology instead of writing everything myself. So when we started working, this is what Action Henk looked like after 1 month. So it's definitely a bit different, because this is what it looks now. So you can see there's a bit of a difference. The funny thing, though, is that when we did this first milestone, which was after 1 month, the overall game development took 1.5 years. So when we did this first milestone, we were like, well, it's 1 month. we have this physics, and we have the character, and we have some particles and sound, and it's looking great. And I think we're almost there, you know. And it's really tricky because it can be a bit of it can be dangerous because you're working for 1 month, and especially early on in development, you can make a lot of progress. So you're building this, and you're like, oh, well, I think we're pretty much done, you know. And then it takes another 1.5 years to get to this. So you have to be wary of this. I mean, I think people always say that, you know, like the last 20%, it takes 80% of the time. Or it's like you have all these analogies. But you have to be really careful with the early progress that you make, because now, in retrospect, this is obvious that this one looks better, but you don't know about this end result when you're here. You're like, oh, well, this is going pretty well. So be careful of that. And I think for Action Henk, our main goal was to try and get the game done and launched as soon as possible, because we had experience with making games from our school, but we didn't have experience with selling games. Which is a great bridge into the next part I'm going to talk about, which is marketing. So one of the things we wanted to do was like do live streams on Twitch and show development of the game, which seems like a lot of fun. Well, it is a lot of fun, but it costs a ton of energy, and you don't. I mean, I don't know if any of you like watch streams on Twitch, for example. You see these people, and you're like, oh, they're just sitting behind a computer playing some games and interacting with the chat. But you should try and do it once, and then you realize how much energy it costs, because you are so focused trying to talk with the people, trying to be interesting into the camera, and also, in the meantime, trying to build a game. So we did that for a while, but that was just too much work. Another thing that usually comes with building a game is like showcasing at events such like this. So going to like a Unity stand at Gamescom, for example, stuff like Indie Mega Booth. You have all kinds of places where you can show your game. We also went to South by Southwest because of like a grant we got from the government. So it's all like really cool, and it's really fun to show your game. But there's also a big downside to this, and it's, again, that it costs a lot of time and energy, and you don't really think about it. But when you go to, for example, if you go to the United States, you know, you have to fly there, you have to get accustomed, you have jet lag, then you have this event, then you're showcasing, then you go back, and then you probably get sick afterwards, because that's how conferences go. So before you know, you're like 2 weeks, you spend 2 weeks on just showcasing the game, and then if you're critical, how many people really, you know, how many new potential customers that you really reach? And I think there's also a part here where people in like indie game development, as you call it, they want to be part of it. And I really remember that feeling as well. When I was starting out, you want to be part of the people that are making games, and you want to be part of the games industry. And being at these events really makes you feel like you're part of it. And again, that's dangerous, because you might be spending a lot of money, wasting a lot of time to go to these events, just because you feel like, no, because that's what everyone's doing. And if I want to be like, you know, the big, cool game developer guy, then I need to also be there. So we are now, now we're working on our new project. We are a lot more critical about this stuff. Like, we're a lot more critical about time management and stuff like showcasing, marketing, that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, be resourceful, because in a small team, there's not that much time. So after 9 months of work, we launched our game on Steam Early Access, which is, for the people that don't know it, is like a service on Steam where you can launch your game while it's still in beta, while it's still in development. So we were basically halfway through development, and we already had a version out there that people could buy, which comes with certain upsides and downsides. On one end, it's really cool that people can already play your game, and you can get feedback, you can build a community. But the problem is that you also, the moment you start selling your game, you have the promise that you're going to finish the game. So people start expecting updates, and we said, well, we're going to do every 2 weeks, we're going to launch an update. And then you're spending 1 week building something new, and you spend the other week getting it ready to launch and fixing all the loose ends and fixing all the bugs. So again, it sounds really cool on paper, but you have to realize the amount of time that it takes. So I'm not sure if I would do it again for a new project. I'd rather just do something like a closed beta or an open beta, where you can still get the feedback, but you don't have the promise towards your customers. And then also you have to realize that not all game launches go really well or make a lot of money. So for us, it was a pretty big slap in the face, because we were like, yeah, we're gonna launch it, and then we're gonna make a lot of money, and then we're just gonna, finish the game. And then it was like, nope. So we had to figure out how we're gonna finish the game if we don't have the money, or the game is not making enough money yet. Or what if nobody buys the game? At least we had a couple people playing it. But then if only a couple people buy the game, you still sort of promise to them that you're going to finish it, but the release kind of already showed that there's not really a crowd out there, or so that's kind of hard. So it's a bit of a gamble. The biggest tricky thing about early access is that everyone's going to give input to your game, which really gives you this feature creep thing where people start saying oh yeah, let's do a level editor, and we're like, yeah, that's cool, we're going to build a level editor. And then people are like, well, how about online multiplayer? We're like, yeah, sure, we'll do online multiplayer. So which is all, I mean, they're all great ideas on paper, but we're just a team with 2 programmers, and building all these features, again, it's a lot of fun, but because there's so many features, we had to be really sloppy about the features themselves, because we didn't have the time to really focus on these core features. So in the end, the game has a ton of features, but they're all a bit sloppy, which I think is a shame. So I'd love to be, again, more critical about that in the next project. So I think it all, in the end, you can hear the sort of general theme. It all comes down to time management, which sort of means money management, or just staying alive as a company. So then after 1.5 years, we did the full launch of the game. And because we already did a early access launch, it's kind of hard, because you sort of waste a bit of your momentum already on the early access, because the game is sort of already out there. But now it's really out there, and it's like, do you just sort of rip the label off because you're constantly doing updates? Is it all of a sudden done now, or when do you decide that? So we said, let's really get a lot of stuff for the full launch, so we have a serious launch. So it's not just oh, this is the last update. No, we had half of the game content. We had the official, the final version of the multiplayer, the level editor, that kind of stuff. And we said originally that we wanted to make the game in 6 months. We said 6 months because we knew then it will probably take 1 year. So, and then eventually it turned out to be 1.5 years. So again, realize that how much longer things take than you planned. But I'm still really glad with the end result of 1.5 years, because I feel like that's still a pretty short cycle, because before you know it, you end up in 3 or 4 years of development. And the main reason we wanted a short cycle is because we could learn how to do a proper marketing strategy. So the marketing strategy for Action Henk was mainly all about YouTubers and live streamers. And so you might recognize this guy, Markiplier, or maybe you recognize this guy, Jacksepticeye, or this live streamer, Man vs. Game. And they all had a huge influence in the success of Action Henk when we launched it. And I think also, originally you'd think that people would also always say no, when the reviews come, you'll get sales. When you get press on these big websites like Polygon or Kotaku, that's when you're going to get the sales. And then when you look back at the sales, you see that that doesn't really do that much. However, when a big YouTuber like Markiplier plays your game, you're going to see it in the sales data. So I would dare to say that 3/4 of the sales that we made on Action Henk are the result of a YouTuber or a live streamer playing the game. It's that serious. I think that's the amount of influence. So I have a little trick question for you, which is, this is the sales graph of Action Henk since the very early beginning. So this is the early access launch, and then this is early 2017. And somewhere here in between, we had the final full launch of the game, which is us trying to make as much noise as possible on the internet for 9 months straight. So now I would like you to guess where the final launch of the game was, and it's going to be wrong, because this is the full launch of the game. So you can see, I don't know if you can see it in the back, but you can see there's actually 2 spikes there. So the first one is the actual full launch of the game. And then the second one is a day later, this streamer, Man vs. Game, this guy, he plays Action Henk for 48 hours on his stream. Don't ask me how he does this, but he's like a really big fan of the game, and he plays it for 48 hours straight, and we are like, worrying for his health. Like, how does he keep up like this? So, and what that does is it creates this second spike, which is bigger than our launch spike. So one person can create more noise in one day, or well, I guess 2 days, than we do in like 1.5 years of trying to make noise. And then you have the big one there. That's Markiplier. So we have our launch month. This is like the launch month. And then, well, you can see that's sort of a general sales pattern, right? Like you get sales, you get a spike, and then it just goes like this. And then it takes down. And then 1 month later, he makes one video of Action Henk. And he's like, oh, Markiplier, this is Action Henk. It's a really cool game. And he plays it, and he's like, oh, this is so much fun. And then it's just like, boom. He does like the launch day ×3 on his own in one video. So our second month after launch made the same money as the first month of launch. And that was just because one guy did one video. So yeah, I hope you realize the importance of this, and that's something I'm definitely taking into account for our next game as well. Like these people have so much influence, and it's a really interesting world as well, because people tend to be like, I don't get it, all these YouTubers, and why are kids watching this? And it's cool if you dive into it. It's a really interesting world, and it's really interesting people. So if you want to do games and you're interested in marketing stuff, definitely dive into this world because it's big. So finally, we also wanted to do like a console version of the game, for which we work together with a publisher, Curve Digital. So the PC version, or the Steam, like PC, Mac, Linux, Steam version was all launched. We sort of did that ourselves. And then for the console version, we wanted to work with a publisher that would port the game to these platforms, to Xbox and PlayStation. And then they would launch it as well. And then we ran into some other things as well, because there's so many game developers, you tend to think that now there's a lot of publishers appearing all of a sudden, because people are like, well, how do we stand out between the crowd? How are we gonna we need the marketing stuff. And then the publishers go like, oh, we can do marketing stuff. And they're all like, yeah, we'll arrange it for you, no worries, we'll do the porting and we'll get you here and there. And then when they start working, you realize that they're also just humans, right? And they're also they make mistakes. And we ran into this like a lot, where we realized that giving everything out of hand to a publisher is not necessarily going to give you superior results. In contrast, for them, it's just another game in their portfolio. And for you, it's like your life, basically. So they can never live up to the standard that you would do yourself. So yeah, this is something to take into account as well, because people tend to, or at least I thought, like, oh, a publisher will take care of it. That's like the magic solution. Unfortunately, like, there's not really magical solutions. And then finally, we also wanted to join Humble Bundle. You might have heard of that as well. It's like this site where you can buy a bundle of games for like a small price, or you can sign up to like a monthly subscription, and then for like $10 you get 10 games every month, which is a great deal, because you can get sort of get a pile of cash in exchange for having a lot of people that play your game all of a sudden. And obviously it's not the same money you would make if they would all buy your game, but they wouldn't all buy your game, because else they would have done it by now. So the Humble Bundle is really great. A lot of new players. That's really cool. There's one thing though, and that is when you launch on Humble Bundle, a lot of people are going to have a spare key of your game. So the value of your product kind of goes down, because these people effectively pay like €1 for your game. So what you get nowadays, because there's so many bundles and so many games and people with like spare keys, you get sites like Kinguin and G2A, where you can buy Action Henk for only €1.50, which is kind of a weird thing. Like, there's a lot of developers that have opinions on this, but to be honest, I feel like it's sort of part of digital culture, and this is just what happens. If a lot of people have spare game keys, sites are going to pop up where people are going to sell these keys. And there's a lot of shady stuff going on as well, and a lot of stories about, like shady credit card fraud things. And I don't know. the thing is, it just happens, and that's okay, man. The only thing that I say is that if people want to buy the game on a site like this, I'm like, we're not making any money if you buy it off a site like this. So then you might as well just get it on Pirate Bay, which to me was a huge thing. When the game was launching, I was checking the Pirate Bay later that evening, and then it was on there, and then I'm like, yeah, now I'm like a serious game developer. Our game is on the Pirate Bay. That means you made a serious product. And again, this is one of those things that people, developers can get really, salty about. Yeah, but the people are downloading my game, and I mean, of course, it would be better if they would buy it, but again, this is part of digital culture. Like, you're gonna tell me like all those Game of Thrones episodes you watched are all like, so I don't know, this is like digital culture. So for me, I think it's just cool that a lot of people also played the game through like a torrent, who might have not checked the game out at all in the first place, or people who might have bought the game because they saw it from a torrent or a friend who torrented it. So to me, this is just all part of it, and I'm just proud that the game is actually on the Pirate Bay. And with that, I'd like to sort of wrap it up. And I got a couple more links if you're interested in stuff I said. So I have a little like blog about the player predictor that I showed earlier. I have a blog about the jump physics, or like the logic that goes on behind the scenes. And I have a little blog about how we set up the Action Henk multiplayer in a very short time. So yeah, take a picture or check it out later. And you can, of course, email me or tweet me. And thank you very much. So now if there's questions, then please. Oh, I see someone all the way in the back. All right. I don't think the mic is on. Yeah, just come here. I'll just repeat the question. So yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the streamers that you mentioned. Do you get in contact with them yourself, or did they just happen to pick up on your game? And do they take commissions for publishing your game? How does it work for streamers and
Yeah.
people like that?
All right. So he asked about like how do we get in touch with streamers, or did they get in touch with us, or how does it work? Like, can you pay them? That kind of stuff. So obviously, if you have money, you can make anyone promote anything. So that's sort of what all the big studios do. If you look at like EA or like when they have a new Battlefield game, you see all the YouTubers playing it because they pay them to check it out. So you have this sponsored content stuff, which is very expensive. And that's something we cannot afford. So they're like, oh, we'll make a video that's 20,000 euros. And we're like, okay, we don't have that. So in our case, it's more about hoping to find people that really like the game. And it's really about like trying to just reach out to them, which can be kind of hard because these YouTubers, like if you look at traditional press, like games press, this is like a medium that's been around. So there's these professional channels that you can reach. There's ways to get in touch with games press. Whereas these YouTubers is just like, a guy who's just like made a YouTube channel and suddenly got insanely popular. So, and they have a lot of fans as well who are trying to reach them as well. So it can be hard to get in touch with a YouTuber because you're sort of just, trying to just send stuff to them. It's like, hey, check this out, you might like it. So it is also a case of just trying stuff and see what sticks. And then the cool thing is, if a big YouTuber plays your game, that's very good advertisements for other YouTubers as well. If you look at, I showed you two YouTubers, Markiplier and Jacksepticeye, who are both very big YouTubers, but Jacksepticeye only found out about the game because of Markiplier playing it. So you see this as well, this ripple effect. If one big YouTuber plays it, they all watch each other's channel. So that's a good sort of marketing as well. Cool. Anyone else? All right, well then, thank you for showing up.